Good morning. So if you look at your watch, we have about 20 minutes to go through some family vacation pictures I brought. And we're going to do it at warp speed so we can be out of here by 11:30. I'm so excited. I have sat where you're sitting. I've looked at this quilt. Tears have filled my eyes. We hung it up there before this Jumbotron was placed. It is going to be moved so we can share it, and that was my intention today. Not a sermon, but just a quilt report. No research, just share with you what so many people were inspired to do during COVID. I think eventually it is going to have to hang on that back wall because that's the only place big enough to hold it. But as Tom Canary also said, raise your hand if you've not let your eyes travel there sometime during sermons just to rest or be inspired. I know that Jumbotron is still in the way, so we have a bunch of pictures. Jason, we're gonna start with we're gonna not even do half these notes I wrote. I could have been so much more relaxed today had I known we weren't gonna have all this time to talk. Would you start with that quilt that was made in 1888 and hangs at the United Methodist Church? Can you see it? Now, yes, I confess I am the chairperson of the stewardship campaign, and in a couple of months, I'm going to be asking you for some money for this church. But we will not be making a quilt like they did in 1888, where you sign your name on the square and put how much you pledge. But this is just the concept that quilts tell stories. And this is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Even their hand signatures are beautiful. But next slide. It's interesting because the woman who has been the stewardship campaign person for as long as I've been here, which is 10 years now, was Bonnie Overholzer. And when she was the chairman of the stewardship campaign, when we had this pandemic, she decided that her theme was look into the future. And so during the pandemic, after we'd been in our homes for about 10 months, getting bored, looking for things in our closets to do, she decided, well, doesn't everybody like to collect fabric? Doesn't everybody like to make quilts? Let's make a quilt. And so she passed out quilt squares to anybody who wanted one. You could paint on it, you could embroider it, you could photograph it, you could do whatever you wanted. And that is what we're going to talk about today, these quilt squares. And Bonnie started it off with this slide. Love is patient, it is kind, it's not boastful, it doesn't envy, it protects, it trusts, it hopes, it believes, and love never fails. Now, interestingly enough, if you've been here, you know that as the UUA, we're thinking about changing our mission statement from mission number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6, number 7, number 8, to a whole different visualization. And the center of that is going to be love. Coincidence or soul belief? Now, when I got my square, because I'd been so hit by those chalice words, Janice Rhodes had a bunch of buttons and she gave me some colorful ones, and I did a chalice because that flame, that candle is what held my heart. But so did a lot of other people had the same thought process. That Janice Rhodes had the next one. I'll snap one really quick. Bonnie Overholzer had the same one. So that chalice was a reoccurring theme in many of our slides. I guess I should be looking this. And what's the next one? Oh, and so in my other square, I wrote down the words to this whole saying that we got from the Jewish Passover. Now, way up there, you can't see those words. So that's the drawback to some church quilts, is all the love that was put in it, it doesn't always see. So that's why we're doing this today, to show each little quilt. Because when Bonnie said, let's make this quilt, I thought, uh-oh, we're getting ready for a big failure. Nobody's going to do a quilt square, Bonnie, except maybe Castero, who loves fabric, or Michelle Jewell, who loves fabric. Or I was blown away when 36 quilt squares showed up. And not just quilt squares, but can you see the diversity? Can you see the talent? I want to bring them in a closer view. All right. The next quilt was from the ministers that were here during the pandemic, Phyllis Hubble and John Manuel, and their quilt said "walking together" because that's what we did. Interestingly enough, just a tad bit of history, I was the president of the board during this time phase, and so we had a board meeting on, I think it was March 18th or something, because what were we going to do about all this news about COVID and people dying? I mean, it wasn't that drastic here, but you could tell this was a germ that you just couldn't fight with. And so the board met and we said, yeah, I think we need to close. And in fact, a UU choir a week prior had posted that 3 of their choir members had contacted COVID and died, and half of their choir got COVID, and that's what put the real scare in us. This is real. And so on the 18th, we met as a board and we said, yeah, we definitely need to close. But you know, we need to give people time. So let's not close this Sunday. Let's close the following Sunday. And we voted yay. An hour later, Phyllis Hubble called and said, Eleanor, we need to close now. And so we did. And I put a note on the front door and the back door. It said closed until further notice. And I'm telling you, I'm not a historian, but I did feel like Martin Luther nailing that thing into that Lutheran church in Wittenberg. But the difference, even though his note changed the Reformation, our note made history too. This was a serious situation and we were going to close. So that was in March. By May, March, April, May, our mothership of the Unitarian Universalist were the first in the whole country to say, we highly recommend that you keep your doors closed until May 2021. I had to read that twice. Are they crazy? That's ridiculous. They were the only church who said that, the only organization that said that. And it gave me hope that the folks who see our overview had great vision and guidance. So enough of the history. Let's keep looking at some more quilt squares. Don and Sue Ziegler were like many people, and they had their son and his family live with them during the time to get out of New York, correct? And their young grandson wrote that adorable little poem, Quarantine, Quarantine, it is very boring teen. It's such a chore-teen when we are in quarantine. Please tell Jackson that we love his quilt square and his frown. The next quilt square is by Precious Lynn Skopik, who she made this with her daughter Kyle. She had just been put into a dementia unit at the Brethren home, and it was very difficult for her because even Kyle and Charlie could not go see her in a dementia unit. Terrible, terrible time. But how creative this quilt square is. Who would never forget those blue masks? Shannon Rash did the next one, and she magnified the shape of the coronavirus cell as the foundation, and she put on that quilt all those words that were buzzwords that we will forever remember: the pandemic vernacular, quarantine, mask, vaccine, loss, isolate, Zoom, home. The next quilt, again, Michelle finds love and peace. And if you can look real quickly, you can see her talent at writing the word peace and her hand stitched. And she even appliqued the heart in the construction of it. Just again, these are what people feel in the symbol that they tell, the story that it is. The next quilt is somewhat of a celebration. It was by Betty Baker, and she had reason to hold up that wine glass and celebrate because her deceased husband, Lieutenant Colonel William Baker, his book had just been put out in print, Brownsville Incident, Texas Incident of 1906. And so she had great reason to have excitement that this book had finally been published. And if there's anyone who can find a silver lining in life, check with Betty Baker. She's so good at it. And by the way, the book is now being published by another company, and they're doing a book signing today. If you are interested, let me know. The next quilt is by our friend Bill Myers, who's at home with a broken hand. Bonnie Overholster decided that we would gather not in the church where we'd get sick, but outside. And so one of the walks, or many of them, were at Caledonia, and Bill had Bonnie make this with her quilting machine because he loved those walks so much during COVID. The next one is by Sue Ziegler, who you're going to say, what is your eye vision? Those are the tiniest cross stitches. She made this beautiful horse. They have horses on their land. They love their horses. That's what gave them hope during COVID, the beautiful colors and the sunrises. And I hope I've explained that well, Sue, because that is one of the most beautiful pictures. The next quilt square was by John Mulligan, who is here. Where is he? John, did you paint those hearts in the bottle? No? Well, it was a Valentine card his sister sent him, and it really struck him because he liked flowers blossoming on the quilt. If we can see the flower seeds of truth with clear comprehension, we know that some of them will land in the fertile soil of the heart-mind and will take root and blossom into a life filled with happiness and peace. And that's how he survived COVID, with good thoughts like that. Susan and Shirley made this beautiful handmade quilt square, proud members of UUG. I love that quilt square. The next one is from Lydia Oberst, and Lydia has a sister that lives there, and I think Eleanor Oberst is younger, and I'm not saying Lydia is a bossy sister, but she had Eleanor make this for her. And at the time, Eleanor was kind of on a roll because Lydia, during COVID, would go to other UU churches because of Zoom, and she could hit 3 or 4 churches on a Sunday. This one was in Prague. She'd get up at 3 in the morning and Zoom in with the Prague church, and she joined that church as well as ours. And so she got her sister to do this quilt square because they stayed home an awful lot. But Lydia also, resourceful as she is, she decided, why not have my new church in Prague be part of the UUG quilt square? So she had one of the lay, let's go to the next slide, one of the lay ministers there named Susan Goldberg make a square for this quilt, and Susan was very, very honored. Susan mailed her description of this to us, and it has gotten lost, but things sometimes surface. I'm not sure if this one will, but I kind of see flowers growing in a glass bowl, that they survive. But I have to say this, Lydia said COVID was horrible, and it's still out there too. But I have always said that my world became larger and more fulfilling because of my experiences during the worst of it. I have friends I would never have had without COVID. I have knowledge and new perspective because of COVID. I'm not going to thank COVID, but I'm proud of myself for making some wonderful lemonade. The next quilt square was by Ron and Ann Gilbert, and they go to Mexico every year, and everybody was like, will they go, will they not go, will they go, will they not? They went. And I remember when they left, they, not knowing how this germ hit us, they were covered in the more covered skin than anybody you've kind of seen, athletic gear and mask and glasses, and they made it to Mexico safe. They had a great visit. Their friends live in Mexico. Their friend's mother, Val, painted this for them. It is a very popular Mexican flower. And Anne, excuse me if I botch this, but I think this is a bromelae. Would you say the word? Brumaceae. So they saw that every day, and their dear friend Val painted that. The next quilt square is of our dear creative friend Prue, who's probably watching. She's had the genius to photograph and put things on her quilt. And from left to right, she was still in grief from the loss of her husband, Frank. The next one to the right is she made hundreds of masks. Also during this time, she had mitral valve repair. She had a very long recovery during all this, stress upon stress upon stress. Then we had Black Lives Matter. That's a picture of Prue surviving during her long recovery. And I love, at this point, I'm about 97.3% feral and will not be able to be integrated back into society. Her sister got her face covered with a mask. Prue even helped us remember we had an election during that time, and in the very lower right corner, she had made a gingerbread house. And what I loved about this is she has such artistic ability, but not a lot of home ec. She put the gingerbread house in the oven to heat the icing to make it hard. It melted. The whole gingerbread house fell apart, but she was encouraged to still enter it anyway. Moral of the story being, go with the flow. Thanks, Prue. We love that quilt square. The next one is from Nancy Crawford, who we know is in York right now, and I love hers. Nancy can just say, I might not be an artist, I might not be able to thread a needle, but I'm gonna make a square. I love music, flowers, family, friends, books, coffee. Now, I'm not gonna say that's wine. What do you think it is? I'm gonna say it's olive oil. So Nancy, we thank you for that quilt square. The next one is by our own Donna Brown, and I love this. Donna took the time during COVID to study something she'd always known about in her life, but didn't even know there was a name for it. And it was Druid Studies, nature-based spirituality. And so she studied it she had 3 years of COVID. And so she used this as a way to express what she did during COVID. And it's divided into quarters, and each animal represents a season and a skill. And Donna, this is a beautiful reminder of how you made good time during COVID. Thank you for bringing that to us. The next quilt square is from Tom, Canary in the back. And he said, Eleanor, I often look up at that quilt hanging in the church, feeling somehow connected with the other attendees at the service. I felt a part of something good. And he thinks it's an amazing assemblage of messages of hope and peace. I do too, Tom. And his quilt square, I might butcher because I've never studied French. Can you say that out loud, Tom? Do you hear that accent? Way to go. And it means the joy of living. Nice to find a silver lining during COVID. This quilt square also just blew me away. Ariane Perry, we see him often on Zoom. I hope you're out there today, Ariane. This represents, it has the name of his son, Sarek John Griffin. It has the name of his wife, Melissa Sando, and his own name, Ariane. And each thing on here represents those families. The little bumblebee is because Melissa is also often called the bumblebee. Sarek is a lion, and the tail of the lion, and Ariane, in an Egyptian symbol, the Aurora Boreas, he is a snake eating his own tail. But when this quilt square came in, I was like, wow, who knew that man could be that artistic and creative? Ariane, I give you a far more artistic credit now. Thank you for bringing this to us on this wall forever. Our next quilt square is so precious because one, the woman who put it all together, Ann Woods, she and her husband, Chuck Strahl, they were members for years. They just moved to Maine 2 years ago. And Chuck helped us build a little public library outside. And he did it so smart that we didn't have to get permission from the borough because he put it in a pot, so it's not permanent, and nobody's going to pick that heavy thing up and pick it up. But now we have a little lending library, and Anne is on the wall as well as Chuck for all she did. This next square was done by 11-year-old Cameron Warren, the daughter of our member Janine Weaver, and she painted herself bright colors, and she put half black, half white hand. And Cameron, next time you're here, I'm going to give you a big hug because I love that square. The next square is by Noni Vanderholt. She said, I made it right after we had a wonderful COVID Zoom service with a very talented lady whose name I cannot remember, of course, and she sang Kumbaya, which she informed us originally meant come by here, asking for divine presence in all things, beautiful, resonant, and just what we needed. I remember that service. Does anybody else? Susan, do you remember the woman? Melanie DeMore. So we have it in felt and fabric, and we have it in Susan's brain. The next quilt square was by Chris Eisel, who has been the chair of the membership committee. And if anybody has a large family, it's Chris, because she takes care of every member of this church. When this quilt square came in, I thought, oh, that's her husband, Jerry, and that's her, and that's her son. And why is her hair black? And Chris said, no, Eleanor, those are not real people. It's just her church family. I hear the kids coming. We're almost running out of time. Let me fly by through the next one. Connie Colesmith made this one. She teaches German in the public schools. She put all the children, not around the world, not around a globe, but around the chalice. Love, together, acceptance, friendship. How beautiful. The next quilt square is by Lynn McDonald. Lynn, I don't know you. I'd like to get to know you, but you captured again this reoccurring theme of love. The next one is by Val Hosky. She and her husband got married in the year 2000. They love their universities, and that's what it represents. Michigan State and Penn State, the big heart, the little heart, a lot of love showing in this for the large community and the small community. And the next heart is by Rich Jackson and Susie Umade. They're very much in love and show that love on their quilt. Our next square is submitted by Ann Cavanaugh, who has passed away, and she really likes Sally Voris, who has also passed away. I think this is from Sally's farm, White Rose. Sally had a wonderful laugh. We're glad to know that they will forever be in our hearts on the wall. Our next quilt square is by a master quilter herself, Judith McLean, and although I am a terrible photographer, climbing up on that ladder, that's the best I could get. In principle, it's even more beautiful. And Judith said, it's hard to remember what I was thinking at the time, but I'm guessing it meant that the experience of the COVID period was something like being underwater. How true. Submerged in isolation and peace. But on the outside, the world was full of waves of turmoil and fear. My faith was strengthened by the quiet, both external in my home and internal in meditation. That's just hits it on the nail. But there was another square, and it's in the upper right-hand corner. And with my poor vision, I thought that was Ann Woods who made the quilt, but that is Judith. And Judith sent that quilt square because sewing has always been a time of reflection and listening to podcasts for me. During COVID, I worked on my bucket list, which included finishing my Baltimore album quilt, which had been left unfinished for 15 years. This next quilt square is by Carol Stovall, and it looks like batik, and applied on top of that, another image. It says Black Lives Matter and standing on the side of love. Carol, we love that you're there at the Unitarian Church in York, but we miss you, and we thank you for that beautiful square. The next one is the one from Lynn and Gary, who were in Mexico all year round, good friends of Ann and Ron, and thank you for getting them to do that. This heart is an interesting note to end on because we don't know who made it. So detective work, if you know who made this, please let us know. But what does it say? That during these dark, terrible days, people had love. They found it. But what I love best is how Jason Resch perfectly put a square in that is a nice way to end this. 2020 hindsight. May we all, there will be other pandemics. There will be other crises in the world, but may we each of us find the strength of loving affection and trusting hope that no matter what, we will get through this.